Ladies and gents, my name is Matt Locke and you're listening to, and perhaps watching, the Unleashing Potential podcast. It's in these episodes that I chat with a range of progressive individuals who are unleashing their potential on the world around them at work and in life. With that said, I'm glad you're here so you can join me as we take a deep dive with today's guest. Hi Sarah, welcome to the podcast. It's a pleasure to have you here. I think it might be a nice introduction if maybe you could just share a little bit about maybe where in the world you are and what it is that you're all about.
Hi, yeah, it's lovely to be here. I'm Sarah Connolly. I'm originally from the UK, but I'm currently in Brisbane in Australia. I've been here for 6 years and in Australia for 22 years now.
You win, I'm 20. You've got 2 years on me.
I was just in time for the 2000 fireworks. Just in time.
Right. Oh, fantastic. It's an easy way of remembering as well, huh?
Exactly.
Now, Sarah, you're an HSP, I keep might say HBC, because it's an HSPC coach, speaker and educator, a highly sensitive person, coach, speaker and educator specializing in alcohol-free living. Given that I've just stumbled over it several times, I think it's quite natural that we start by explaining what an HSP is actually.
Of course. So it's, as you say, a highly sensitive person, and it is a trait that's been identified in 20% of the population and also across 100 different species around the world, including dogs. So there's been a lot of research done into HSPs and what it means to be one. And essentially, so Dr. Elaine Aron originated the whole idea and then did most of the research behind it. And she came up with the acronym DOES, D-O-E-S, which summarizes what highly sensitive people are, what the traits are. So the first one is depth of processing. So as highly sensitive people, if you'd like to keep it simple, we're big thinkers. We overthink, we look at everything, we're analysts, we really dive into details, we think things through a huge amount. And what that ends up with this being is very intuitive over time, because we really do set up our systems to recognize situations from every angle. And then when those situations arise again, our intuition will lead us to make decisions. So we process information very deeply, more so than 80% of the population. The O is for overstimulation. Now, this is the one that most people first identify when they think about being HSP. So if you are bothered by loud noises, if you walk into a restaurant and there's people talking and drinking and cutlery and you feel overstimulated, that is a real HSP trait. And I don't just mean slightly bothered by it. I mean, like, it really does put you on edge. Right. Even things like a ticking clock when you're going to bed. See, I cannot sleep in a room if there's any noise, ticking clocks, and it's that kind of rhythmic noise. I have to remove it from the room. Right. So we get very overstimulated, which means we can be quite cranky if we don't know this about ourselves and we don't manage it, because we're constantly feeling like we're in fight, flight, freeze. We're constantly frazzled. The third one, E, is emotional and empathy. So we are very sensitive to other people's emotions and feelings. And we can tell, sometimes we can feel them. So you'll often find HSPs be highly emotional, watching even movies and things like that. We get really deeply involved and engaged with things. Also with art, with music, often HSPs have an ear for music because they can tell where the music's going to go because they're so engaged with it all and their senses are on high alert. And the last thing is sensing the subtle. So if I'm talking to you and I'll start to notice little changes in your expression in your face, and I will make a meaning from that and I will respond to that. So HSPs are often very good at jobs such as counsellors and coaches and psychologists because they have that really deep awareness of the other people around them and able to sense those subtleties, not just in what people see, but also in how people speak and the words that they use. So overall, it's a trait that survived. So it's a necessary trait for our society and for culture, but it is in the minority. So HSPs will struggle in the modern world because it isn't designed. It's designed by 80% of the population that don't have that sense of overstimulation, which is why I think many of us turn to alcohol and other substances to calm us down.
Yeah, sure. I mean, it sounds like it could be a blessing and a curse all in one, because I imagine it's exhausting with the overstimulation, being on high alert, yet, as you say, in terms of being able to show empathy, how that can feed into emotions, and how that feeds into coaching, or I assume interacting with family members, friends, anyone really that you interact with. So is that a fair way of looking at it, or if I missed a point?
No, I think it's the perfect way to look at it. It's absolutely a blessing, and it can be a curse if it's not managed. And so as a collective, as HSPs, we're trying to educate people to acknowledge that this is a trait, as opposed to us just being too sensitive, which is what we've been told growing up. You're too sensitive, get on with it, what are you worrying about? This is a physiological thing too. It's not just a cognitive thing. It's like our amygdala, which is the fight, flight, freeze center of the brain, is larger in HSPs, which means that it's more activated. So it does mean that we're a lot more alert and a lot more stimulated by life. As far as the blessing side goes, if it's managed successfully, you often find that HSPs will thrive way more than the average person if they're given the right environment. And I equate it to the orchid dandelion theory, which to me is fascinating, where they've identified that we have dandelion children and we have orchid children. And the orchid children will wilt and die given the wrong environment. But if they're given the right environment, they will really thrive and become beautiful. And dandelions can grow anywhere. They're hardy little flowers.
Yes, they do.
And they can grow through the cracks in the pavement or in the garden. So,
yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Now, you mentioned that HSPs therefore have a tendency to create dependencies on, or have other outlets such as alcohol, for example. I assume there are others. And that's some sort of, I guess, escape during a period where perhaps you don't understand or recognize what it is, the trait that you have, and therefore it presents itself in other ways which lead to, I guess, taking a path of less desirable behaviors, maybe that with alcohol and the others. So I'm interested to hear how that was for you, and what the journey has been for you. And I know that
sure.
I know that it involves your father as well, and I appreciate you sharing. It's appreciate you being as candid as I know you will be.
Thank you. Yes, it's definitely been a learning time for me. I didn't know I was HSP until quite recently. So looking back now, realizing that not only am I an HSP, my dad for sure was too, and my dad was also somebody that relied a lot on alcohol, particularly in his earlier years. And to your point, I think we are more likely to seek relief in certain substances than other people are, because of that sense of constantly being stressed or on high alert if we're not knowing how to manage it, which definitely was the case with my dad. So my alcohol consumption escalated dramatically as my father's health declined. Right. He was given a very short prognosis in 2019. And I got to travel backwards and forwards. At the time, it was before COVID, to spend time with him in his final months. So if you think about it, there's me as an HSP, sensory overload, grief, traveling, 24-hour flights, exhausted, It was just a recipe for disaster, really. And alcohol on tap, no children, no husband to answer to, and just given free rein and dealing with my father. And so I started to really rely on alcohol to numb everything that was going on for me at the time. That's not to say I wasn't misusing it before that, but my understanding of alcohol misuse has changed quite a lot since I realised now I know so much more about what alcohol does to us. You know, I was drinking like everybody else, and now to me that's excessive. You know, it's excessive alcohol consumption. But back then it was like, of course we drink half a bottle of wine a night. You know, that's normal. So
what you're saying it's not.
It
No,
got.
I'm kidding. I mean, certainly I'm growing up in countries like the UK and like Australia. I mean, for sure, drinking is somehow part of the fabric, part of the culture almost. And thankfully, I think that's changing, as we'll touch on today. But anyway, sorry, I interrupt.
No, you're absolutely right, and I think that's part of it too. You know, you think that it's normal, and I thought that drinking that much was normal, but I knew that it wasn't. I knew that it affected me a lot more than others. Like I would wake up and I'd feel terrible, you know, with the worst depression, anxiety that other people didn't seem to suffer from as much. So I always knew that alcohol and me were a bad combination. I just didn't quite know how to extract myself because it was everywhere. That's what everybody did.
And do you think does the alcohol sort of magnify the effects of HSP? Or is it simply that it magnified other natural traits that you had that were not necessarily related to HSP?
I think I know alcohol amplifies everything negative about us as humans. You know, it depletes all the things that we need to survive and be happy. Serotonin, GABA, you know, all of our neurotransmitters are affected. So as an HSP, I think it's more likely to affect us in that sense of dependency, because it's so quick and it's a real, you know, we get that real reward from it because it's like, you know, that glass of wine that you have at the end of the day, kind of, that's on steroids for us. And as far as, you know, affecting things like depression, anxiety, there's no doubt. And then if you add into the mix the fact that I was a woman going into her mid or her late 40s, and that hormone cocktail that happens then, it is really, it's a tsunami of
absolutely. And so in 2019, your father, you were traveling back and forth to the UK. I think he passed in 2019, is that right?
Yeah, so my dad and I had some great times together before he passed away, and then he died in June 2019, and I was with him at the time. And I did have one of those sort of pivotal epiphany moments where I really did feel like I did not want to die with any sense of regret that I hadn't lived my best life. And that moment was really pivotal in my decision to stop drinking, because I knew that it was holding me back. I knew it was preventing me from being the person that I knew I was capable of being. So
you weren't, what I think society would say today is you weren't an alcoholic. It wasn't that you needed to go into months of rehab or go to Alcoholics Anonymous per se, but that drinking was making itself more and more present in your life, and you understood that that wasn't at the end of the day, that's not the path you wanted to go down. It was reducing performance, reducing quality of life.
Correct. And it was really obvious to me, but not so much to anyone else around me. If you'd asked anyone else, did I have a drinking problem, they would have said, what do you mean? You don't drink any more or less than I do.
Say, yes, you don't drink enough.
Yes, that's right. Have some more. But the interesting piece, and you raised the rehab, was that I didn't know how to get help because I wasn't bad enough. And I didn't relate to AA and their model. And at the time, there really wasn't anything else. And my GP said, do 2 weeks in the rehab program. And I was like, whoa, that's too much. But I didn't know what else to do. So that's what I did. I did hugely confronting, because I felt a lot of shame, going in there. I really felt shameful. I felt like I was weak. And I felt like I didn't belong when I was there. And so it was a really interesting time from getting to know myself in there as somebody who, the fact that, and meeting other people in there like me, not all of them, but many, and learning that alcohol doesn't discriminate against anyone, no matter who you are. And it takes a huge amount of courage for people to get help. And it's not always the kind of help that you really want at that juncture in your life.
No, absolutely. Look, I imagine that feeling a sense of shame in that situation, I imagine I would feel exactly the emotions you described. There's a certain stigma, isn't there, that's attached to it. If you need rehab, in societies that we live in, there's a stigma attached to it, which hopefully is lessening. And I'm glad you made the point, because it's funny, isn't it? Because I would say this, I would probably think the same to myself, as, oh, how weak am I, needing to go into rehab. But it's the opposite is true. It is incredibly, the amount of courage it would take, it would be incredible. But out of interest, I mean, what does 2 weeks in it's not a full rehab clinic as like the Betty Ford clinic and so on, I imagine.
Oh, it was pretty full on. When you arrived, you had the full body search and bag search, and
so really all in.
But it was all in. But the majority of people that go in there are there for reasons that are not necessarily choice. As an example, it might be a court requirement, or
right.
It may, they're not necessarily there of their own free will. But
so it was really rehab. It wasn't like a halfway house. It was really rehab for 2 weeks.
No, it was, blood tests and breathalyzers and signing in and out. Yeah, I mean, it was nice in the sense that I had my own, I had my room, and we got fed. I didn't have to cook for 2 weeks. And the education was amazing for me, because my brain was able to absorb what I learned in there, whereas there were a lot of people in there, you could see they just weren't there yet to really be able to learn what they were being taught. And that was the shame bit. And many of them were back 3, 4, 5 times. Some of them almost seeing it like an annual holiday. They would go into their 2 weeks, and they got to go and shop in Brisbane City.
Out of interest, what was the reaction from your family and friends, who probably didn't perceive you had any sort of problem with alcohol?
I had to be very explicit with people and very honest, and it was really hard because I didn't want to say I didn't have a problem, because I believe I had a problem for me. And that was what I always would say to them. If they wanted to benchmark, well, how much were you drinking? That's the question that people want. They want to know the answer. It's like, well, it was too much for me. It doesn't matter how much it is. And that's the message that I always say to people is you don't have to, there's no line in the sand. If it's too much for you, it doesn't matter how much it is. My husband already knew, bless him, and had been really supportive. Whereas nobody else knew, and I didn't tell people for a while, to be honest. I didn't kind of make some big announcement until I'd come out, and my family, my parents had both passed away, so they weren't there to tell. And then my husband's family in Sydney. So, but I really learned to be very intuitive, more intuitive about how I shared, what I shared, when I shared it.
Sure.
for two reasons. One, for me and my boundaries, and two, because many of the people that I shared it with could probably and have themselves, you know, identified as having an issue with alcohol.
So at the end of the 2 weeks, I mean, well, I guess the beginning of those 2 weeks signal the end of you drinking forever.
Yes, well, forever is a long time, but I left after the 2 weeks and I decided I would do 3 months. After 3 months, I decided I'd do 3 more. And I had this kind of, if I could just not drink for a year, that would be incredible. And I didn't imagine in my wildest dreams that I could not drink for a whole year. And it got to a year, and by then you've done everything sober, and you realize that actually it's pretty bloody good not feeling like crap a lot of the time. And you start to get to know yourself better and enjoy life on your terms. And so after the year, I was, why would I? There was no reason for it anymore. I'd learned all the tools to deal with my HSP trait and just being human, which is hard. And I'm still learning who I am, because for 20 years of my life I was drinking.
Yeah, absolutely. Look, I'm imagining there are people who will be listening to this who no doubt say to themselves, well, I don't have a problem with alcohol at all. I just drink socially, it's under control. I'm happy. And if they were honest, if they were told tomorrow, actually, you can't have a drink for the next year, it would be interesting what their natural reaction would be as someone who has just told themselves that actually they don't have a problem with alcohol. And so I'm interested to hear your thoughts around that. You know, I know you talk about the fear and the joy of choosing an alcohol-free lifestyle. What do you normally come across? What crops up as the sort of the main barriers for people when they initially think about the idea of life without alcohol?
The first barrier is what you mentioned, which is I'm really not that bad. It's what we tell ourselves, what our friends tell us, and it's the perfect excuse not to really look at your drinking, because it's everywhere and everybody's doing it. The issue is that if something, as is what happened to me, like my father's death comes along, that your chances of slipping down that slope are a lot higher if you're drinking quite a lot in that I'm not that bad category. So it's very hard for people to make a change if things aren't really, really bad.
Yeah, no,
we tend not to. We get our blinkers on. So that's one of the barriers, and that's why we talk about grey area drinking being, you know, if you are questioning your drinking on a regular basis, if it is something that bothers you and you give it mental airtime, you know, you're thinking, well, I won't drink on a Monday, Tuesday, and then I might, and I'll have something on, and the party, in this whole energy that we spend negotiating on when and where we can drink. If people have that going on, it generally means that alcohol is getting in the way of them living their best life, because that's exhausting. It's an exhausting way to live. I did it for years. The main other barriers are, as you've mentioned, friends, family, what to say to people, how to communicate that you don't want to drink without saying, oh, I'm an alcoholic and I've got a really big problem, because that's not the case either. It's the communication piece. There's being excluded, there's fear of losing friendships, there's fear of losing relationships, there's fear of actually what's possible for me if I don't drink. And that's something that we talk about a lot in our groups, because we coach high successful, high performers. And there is a sense of that's the one thing that keeps them from really getting where they want to go. And that's scary too. You know, we're afraid of failure, but we're also afraid of success. And so that's an interesting one to look at, that we look at in the groups. what's possible for you without alcohol. You may not be rolling in the gutter drinking 2 bottles of vodka a day, but what's possible without it, and what they discover is an extraordinary host of benefits.
And so when you're working with your clients, how, and you hear those barriers, you know, those same barriers, that up they go. How do you approach that? How do you help them to reframe the role that alcohol plays in their life?
In many different ways, with so many different tools and techniques and ways to reframe thinking. Also, a lot of somatic work is what I love, is trying to get people into their bodies. We spend so much time in our heads, you know, trying to make sense of things cognitively, when people can if we teach people how to really get in touch with how they feel, that helps them with cravings, that helps them not be reactive when things come up, if they can really start to know themselves and their signs of body. So somatic work is a big part of what I do. And working towards what they really want as opposed to what they don't want. Traditionally and historically, it's all been, you know, you can't drink and life is over, and you're just going to have to grit your teeth and bear it because you're somebody that can't drink. You know, it's miserable. Nobody wants that. So we look at the fact that for whatever reason, they've decided to give up alcohol as being a genuine gift, an opportunity for them to discover something new about themselves, to have a new experience in life with people that are on their level, with people they can really connect with. And that's a big part too, is because we do group coaching. They're all come together and support one another and teach one another, because they're all very smart people, you know, varying degrees of success in very different fields. You know, we have human rights lawyers and ER doctors. Like, it's insane. Like, the alcohol affects everybody.
Sure.
So that piece too is really important, when they realize that they're not alone, because that's a really big part, is you think it's just you, and you go into the spiral of, I'm, you know, on my own here and I'm weak and blah blah blah. I'll pick up a drink and make myself feel better.
Well, certainly on a very practical level, I guess it's much easier to manage our, you know, the environments that we have control over. So at home, for example, or at work, or in the car, or whatever it is we're doing. But what about socializing? Because I imagine, especially for, you know, these high performers that you're talking about, there are, I'm sure, expectations. I mean, pandemics aside, but expectations about social occasions that involve clients or co-workers, colleagues. And I say this as someone who's been plant-based for nine or 10 years now. So nothing to do with alcohol, but I'm still somehow the black sheep of the family when I go out, because I'm the odd one out still after this long. And I'm guessing it's a similar situation when someone says, well, actually, it would be hard for me to say, I'm pregnant, so I can't drink. I wouldn't be able to get away with that. But I'm
that
really
would be
that
would raise some eyebrows.
It would, absolutely. Great distraction technique. But I'm interested to hear how you coach your clients around how to handle those situations. And actually, I shouldn't have to say I'm pregnant. I'm assuming there's a much better way of handling the subject by being upfront, but without being confronting to them, and without them feeling somehow almost attacked because, well, they are choosing to drink alcohol, for example.
Yeah, it's a great question. And the answer is different. As you say, it has to feel right for the individual. So we'll work on a line. You know, each individual will create a line that they're really comfortable with, and we'll practice that with them, and we do a bit of role play. The main thing that we coach them is to be confident, because if you go into a situation and go, yeah, well, you know, I'm doing a 90-day alcohol-free program, yeah, I probably shouldn't have a drink. Yes, you're a sitting duck, because people are going to feel that you're having a bad time. So they go, come on, Matt, just have one, you'll be fine. And they're trying to make you feel happy because they want to feel happy. So we also coach our clients to be proud and bold and confident and go into these occasions as I'm going to have the most fun with my soda, water and lime. I'm going to be the funnest person at the party. I'm going to go and meet somebody new that I've never, we build them up to go into those situations with a sense of joy and adventure and curiosity, as opposed to, well, I've just got to turn up and show my face and then I'll, run out the door. Because what we want them to start associating, socializing, not with alcohol. Because if we teach them to stay at home and we coach them to just be, just hide, then they associate not drinking with not being fun.
Yeah, of course.
And what we're trying to do is teach them that not drinking is actually more fun and more exciting and more adventurous than sitting there pouring ethanol down your throat. So that's how we coach that piece.
No, that's great. And look, I'm conscious these days, and it's not about me, but as someone who enjoys sport a lot, and I train a lot and did compete quite a lot and may again in the future. I have to say I have just found that I don't really drink anymore. I didn't make a conscious decision one day, let's say. It was just one of those natural, even because I drink so little, if I had one or two beers, I just feel a bit off in the morning. And that's when I train. I don't want to feel off. I want to feel tip-top. I want to be absolutely on top of my game. And so I just naturally went through a phase where I just didn't really drink. But these days it's much easier. And certainly here in Australia, there's lots of alternatives, alcohol-free alternatives. And one I always spruik, and I have no financial interest in them, but it's heaps normal. I mean, I like the XPA type beers, and I love the fact they call there's a quiet XPA. I think that's genius. But I know that they're going from strength to strength, and some of the mainstream players like Heineken and those, they also now have alcohol-free beers that are more than palatable. Then they used to be just crap. Alcohol-free drinks were just awful, and never really got any traction. But these days there's some really good options, and I'm really keen to hear. I know that you're self-called the sober sommelier, which is brilliant. I'm really keen to hear more about that and where alcohol-free drinks fit into this picture from your perspective and for your clients.
They came up for me. I was about 3 months into being alcohol-free, and I was thinking, surely there must be some adult drinks, because I was always going out and having to order water or Diet Coke or some kind of
like
sugary
Diet Coke's
mocktail.
a healthy option.
Correct, right? Or even kombucha and things like that. And I thought, surely, how the world works, there must be some genius somewhere that's made a decent alcohol-free wine. And at the time I researched, and there was one tiny little store online in the Gold Coast that sold alcohol-free alternatives, very limited range. And they had a champagne. And I thought, I'll give it a try, because I was going away with some girlfriends to Noosa. And historically, we would have been cracking open the Verve or, just going for it. And I wanted to have something
about it, because that's what you do.
Without even thinking about it. That's right. But I wanted to have something so that I felt I fitted in, and so they felt comfortable. And anyway, that started a whole journey for me, because I had the most incredible time up there, and it was such a relief for me to drink a glass of champagne and not actually have the downsides. I loved it. It was like, this is so great, because I didn't actually like feeling drunk, and I didn't like that feeling of losing control. So to me, it ticked the box of like, I can still have fun and have a nice glass of something, but I don't have to deal with the downsides. And that really, absolutely, for certain people. And so when it comes to this space, it's very, there are 50 shades of grey and or more, and everybody's so different and unique. There are stories that I've heard of people that I know that had not been drinking for a really long time and then tried a non-alc alternative and just craved the real thing, and it tipped them over the edge. So the rule of thumb is, if you think it's going to, don't do it.
Don't do it. Yeah.
I think people know. My husband can happily drink a non-alc beer and then drink a real beer, once in a blue moon, and swaps them out as and when he feels like it. I just have non-alc, but I've got friends who literally will not touch an alcohol-free drink if it emulates in any way the real thing.
Sure.
Because
it's good that they have that awareness at the end of the day.
Yeah.
But I think interesting with, like, your husband, for example, I think that's a testament to some of the alcohol-free beers these days. They taste so good that actually, unless you're deliberately looking for that buzz, that feeling of getting drunk, unless you're looking for that, if it's, for me, it was never that. I like the taste. It's cold, it's refreshing. And so for me, the fact something like Heaps Normal in particular, brilliant, because it tastes like beer, which I like the taste of, but zero effects. I can ride my scooter down to the brewery and back again. Brilliant. And then get up in the morning and train and then feel great.
It is. It's brilliant for so many people, not just people that have any issue with alcohol, because it allows them to swap out.
Yep.
Many of my friends do non-alc during the week, and then they'll have a couple of glasses of wine on the weekends. So it's reducing consumption, and it's a massively growing industry. Like, as you know, it's just almost daily I get notified of a new non-alc drink that's come into the market, and so it's a hugely growing space. I'm not surprised as the sober sommelier.
I'm keen to hear a little bit more about that. I'm conscious of time, but talk to me a little bit about the sober sommelier. What's that all about?
So that's my Instagram account, which I started literally just over a year ago now. Yep. And I just started posting about the non-alc drinks that I was discovering, and people liked to hear about them. So it started to build a bit of momentum. And to me, it was a really low-key way of talking to people about not drinking alcohol, because I didn't want to come out guns a-blazing like, alcohol is terrible. It was more, exactly. It was more, look, here's some other things you can try that might help you to cut back, or help you if you're trying to quit. So it's evolved, and I'm not quite sure where it's headed to now. There's so much noise now, but it's been really helpful in growing awareness around alternatives and helping people to find other ways to get that feeling that we want when we drink, which is to feel relaxed and having fun.
And look, I know beers are, I think, more advanced in the range of alcoholic drinks, and so by that I mean non-alcoholic beers are more advanced in terms of flavour and popularity. I don't drink wine particularly, and I know there are some alcohol-free gins, but you're probably the right person as the sober sommelier to say actually there are some great, or not, wines and champagnes and spirits now starting to come on the market. I don't know where we're at, because I'm not in that space.
There are. Champagne is definitely the best options if you want something that tastes exactly the same. There's a couple of brands. Naughty is probably the number one in terms of emulating the real experience. Naughty champagne is my favorite. As far as wines go, they struggle to get anything, particularly in the reds. Like the reds, pretty average, but they're getting better. And the whites and the Gießen, which is a really well-known New Zealand's Marlborough wine. Gießen Zero is my favourite. It's a Sauv Blanc, and to me, I can't tell the difference. So there's so many now. Spirits, they're botanical blends. Some of them are very beautifully crafted and taste very delicious and unique. Some are just flavored water. So you've got to make sure you pick the right ones. But
it's interesting. It's heartwarming to hear that the industry is going in this direction, because for sure they follow the money, and they can obviously see there's a building trend of more and more people who are looking for alcohol-free alternatives. And I think that's a testament to the younger generations as well. And I hope, very much hope, that we, in the not too distant future, get to a point where we either really do have self-driving cars, which is a way away, or in fact just zero alcohol if you're driving. I mean, that to me would, and I said that as an ex-copper from the UK of 20 odd years or more ago, actually. But it would make life so much easier, and would obviously discourage drink driving in that whole grey area. Oh, should I, shouldn't I, am I, aren't I? It just gets rid of the whole discussion. And at least by having decent alternatives in place, people can still go to the pub or the brewery and have, you know, a great social time, enjoying some drinks, air quotes, without any risk of ill health, driving under the influence, or all of the other things that kind of go with it, really. Look forward to that very much. But sad to hear that the red wines are still pretty average, because if I was going to drink wine, it would be a red, and that's disappointing. But as well, we're pretty blessed to live where we do in Australia, where there's some pretty awesome wines as well. So it would be hard push to get such a young range of products, the alcohol-free reds, that would taste like the real thing, let's say. But still, I'm pleased to hear the champagne's a winner by now. That's
yes, definitely.
Champagne
and beer are probably the two.
Yeah, sure. So look, I'm really conscious of your time. You've been very generous with your time. If people wanted to find out more about what you do, and we haven't really talked about Tapped In, let's do that. We shouldn't not, because that's really important if people want to reach out and be in touch with you and all the great work that you're doing. So talk to us a little bit about Tapped In.
Sure. So Tapped In is a website that I created for people that were curious about giving up alcohol, at least for a period of time. And they can go into the website and explore different books that I recommend and courses. There's a bit of a directory in there of venues that serve alcohol-free products, etc. And then there's my coaching side, which is where I do one-on-one coaching, and also launching a 90-day alcohol-free program in February for people that want to explore what life would be like without alcohol for 90 days. And that's formed off the basis of my work over in the States with the alcohol-free lifestyle program.
Fantastic. And so a prerequisite for that course would be, I'm guessing, nothing more than curiosity.
Curiosity and the willingness to stop drinking for 90 days.
Yeah, look, it's interesting, isn't it? I mean, the fact, if someone was listening to that 90 days, if that felt almost too much, then that in itself is a reason, I would argue, to do the program. I know that in dry July, as some people call it, a friend of mine said, we were just chatting in July and halfway through July, I guess, and I remember he said, oh, I haven't had a drink for 17 days. I went, well, that's cool. You're counting the days. He went, yeah. What does that tell you? I said, I couldn't tell you that, how many days it's been since I had a drink. For me, it's, you know, it's not a thing. I said, but clearly, he went, oh yeah, you know, it is. But it was really telling for me that he was counting the days. So, yeah, I assume that actually, in terms of, is that for me? If the thought of not drinking for 90 days seems impossible, or even, I'd have to think about that, then I guess do it. Because it would suggest
that's
that actually
a good point.
Yeah. So well, obviously your website, all of your contact, everything will be in the show notes, of course.
tappedin.com.au. But yeah, you're absolutely right. And I think 30 days is a good start. You know, many people do 30 days. Most of the people I work with have already done 30 days in the past, and then they've tried to, and then they've gone back, and they get to the point where enough's enough. And 90 days is a really good amount of time to see what you're made of, you know,
and see how it feels. I mean, that's one of the best motivators I have found is, and certainly when I talk about, if people want to talk about being plant-based, I certainly don't preach about it, but if people are interested, I talk about it, and I go, honestly, just try it for a month. You'll feel the difference. You just will, as long as you're eating, as long as, yeah, it's a healthy plant-based diet, then you'll feel amazing by comparison. And then you can decide for yourself, but you've got to give it a go if you're interested. So it's the same here, I would suggest. And
that's it.
I would assume life without alcohol, for someone who's regularly consuming alcohol, the contrast would be noticeable, and therefore
Huge.
brilliant, do it, because then you're getting a true sense of what life can be like without it.
Absolutely. It can be quite life-changing.
Absolutely. Very good. Sarah, we're gonna I think draw a line under this for today. Is there anything else you'd like to add? Anything you'd like to share? Any sort of final comments or thoughts?
I just think that you know, as we move forward in this alcohol-free space, it's important really for anyone that's listening that does feel any sense of shame around their consumption, that alcohol is a toxic poison that is really, really hard to escape from in the society. So if anyone is feeling any shame around it, please don't, because it's just a trap that many of us fall into. And we don't judge or shame anyone for seeking help of any sort. So if it's not me, there's plenty of resources on my website or other places to seek help, because life is too short to be living at a 5 out of 10.
What a perfect final thought to leave us with. Very good. Well, there you have it. A huge thank you to Sarah for sharing so much today. And as I've said already, we'll put all of the links in our show notes so you can take a deep dive and reach out to her directly as well if you want to. In the meantime, if you're keen to get your hands on a copy of my book, Lead by Example, I'd love to send you a copy. If you just go to the impactproject.io, take a trip down the rabbit hole, and it'll be on your doorstep in no time. So my thanks once again to Sarah. And as always, be brave, have fun, and get busy making an impact in the world. See ya.